What's up, everybody? Welcome to my channel. Today I'm gonna be working on this 2017. This is a Kia Sorento, and if I'm not mistaken, it has the 2.4 liter. This is a non-turbo. I'm gonna be pulling out the motor. I'm gonna take the motor apart and I'm gonna rebuild it. I'm only gonna put it together. I'm not gonna do the bottom end or the head. I'm gonna leave that to the machine shop. Once the machine shop takes care of the bottom end and I get the head back, I'm just gonna put everything back together and I'm gonna drop it back in the car. In this video, I'm only gonna get as far as pulling out the motor. I might take it apart or I might do that on another video. The first thing I'm gonna do is disconnect the battery. So I already disconnected my negative terminal. I'm gonna remove all the plastics. I'm gonna remove this cover for the engine. I'm just gonna put it on the side. I'm also gonna remove the air filter housing. I'm gonna remove the air ducts that go to the throttle body. And I'm gonna start disconnecting all the hoses and everything that I see electrical on top. I'm gonna start disconnecting that. I'm not gonna go into detail on how to do that. I'm just gonna show you guys the major components. But everything else is pretty straightforward. Like this is pretty simple to remove. All you gotta do is remove this clamp, disconnect these hoses, and then remove the other clamp from the throttle body, and this comes off no problem. Then I'm gonna start disconnecting all the electrical. I got a couple of connectors right here for the coils. This is for the fuel pump. I'm assuming this is a fuel pressure sensor, and then the other sensors I have, they're gonna be for the cam, grounds. So I'm gonna start disconnecting and I'm gonna start removing parts. Before I start taking it apart, I wanna mention that the reason why I'm pulling out the motor is because it had a misfire, and I think it's a valve. It probably has a broken valve or something. I was initially just gonna do the head, but since I noticed that it's super low on oil, and when you turn it on, it sounds funny, I want to make sure that the internals are good because I don't want to remove the head and later on there's damage inside of the motor. So I might as well make sure that everything's good on the bottom end. And if it needs to be rebuilt, I'm going to rebuild it and make sure everything's good. And I don't just do the head and then I have to replace the whole engine after. I pretty much removed and disconnected everything that I need to remove from the top. So I removed this PCB hose and most of the electrical. The rest of the electrical, it goes to the bottom, it goes to the alternator, and then there's a couple of sensors down here as well. I'm not gonna be able to get to those until I raise the vehicle. I'm gonna do that in a minute. And everything around the motor, I already got pretty much everything disconnected. Even the connectors that go back here, they're all disconnected. So I'm gonna go ahead, I'm gonna raise the vehicle, and I'm gonna try to get everything from underneath, well, whatever's left on the electrical. Then I think I'm gonna come back and I'm gonna remove the air filter housing because it is kind of in the way. I'm also gonna remove the battery so I can have more access to all the cooling system, hoses, housings, everything related to the cooling system. And if I don't have this, it'll be a lot easier to get to those. So I'm gonna finish disconnecting everything from the bottom. Then I'm gonna come back to the top and I'm gonna remove this. If anything, I'm just gonna take this off right now. All right, guys, it took me about a minute to remove the air filter housing and the battery tray. And check it out, I have a lot more room to remove the coolant hoses and also the housing. I don't know if this is like a thermostat housing. So I'm gonna go ahead and I'm gonna start taking all of these off. But before I do, I do want to disconnect everything that is on the bottom. That way I can just grab my harness and just move it back. And I have a lot more space to work on whatever I have to disconnect. So I'm gonna go ahead and do that. I'm gonna raise the vehicle, disconnect everything that I have left on this side. And I'm just gonna move the harness to the side and I'm gonna start disconnecting all the coolant lines. But it gives you a lot more room. So it's gonna make it a little easier for me to disconnect everything else. I got it up in the air and now I'm able to go underneath. So there is a drain for the radiator. You can't really see it, but it's right here. So I'm gonna go ahead and drain the antifreeze. I'm gonna try to save it. Another thing I'm gonna do while I'm down here, I'm gonna disconnect the compressor. I'm just gonna unbolt it from the motor. I'm gonna leave it hanging and I'm gonna start removing everything from underneath. I'm also gonna disconnect the connectors that I need to disconnect. So it's only like 3. It's like there's one right there, the throttle body, and then there's another one right here. So I don't know what this is, but that's one. The throttle body is the second one, and then this one right here. So I'm gonna disconnect those 3, and then there is another piece of harness that goes from here underneath the intake. It looks like it's for the alternator and the starter, so I'm gonna take those off and I'm gonna start draining the cooling system too. I'm also gonna start unbolting the engine from underneath, and I think I gotta remove a bracket. So this bracket right here, I'm gonna take it off. I already disconnected the exhaust, and I also removed all the bolts around the transmission and also the flex plate. I already removed all the bolts from the flex plate. I also took off the air compressor. I'm just gonna leave it hanging here, and I disconnected pretty much everything from underneath. I'm gonna go ahead and I'm gonna bring it down. I think I'm gonna remove the alternator. I just gotta remove a bolt from the top. So that's the alternator right there. There's a bolt on top and then another one right here on the bottom. I'm gonna take those off, and I think that's gonna be it. All I have to remove is the intake manifold, couple of other bolts from the transmission on top, the motor mount, and that's pretty much it. So I'm gonna go ahead, bring it down, remove the intake, and I want to take that alternator off. Then I'm gonna do the rest of the transmission bolts. I gotta drain the coolant. I haven't drained it. I'll drain that real quick, remove a couple of hoses, and that's it. I'm just gonna pull out the motor. Just like I told you guys, I was able to move the harness to the side, so I have more room to work on the cooling system. I have to drain the coolant now because I want to remove the intake, and there's coolant lines going to the throttle body, and if I disconnect them now, I'm gonna make a mess. I don't want to make a mess, so I'm gonna start draining the cooling system right now. The other thing is I have access to the alternator bolt. Let me get the light real quick. So here's the alternator, and then this is the bolt I have to remove. I'm gonna take that one off right now, and then I gotta remove the one on the bottom. I wanna clean this side of the engine, that way I'm able to just pull out the motor and I don't have to remove the exhaust. I'd rather not remove the exhaust right now. If I'm able to just take everything off, I'd rather do that because the exhaust is on the back. And it's not that hard to get to, but I'd rather do it once I pull out the motor. So that's pretty much it. I'm gonna start draining the coolant, remove the intake, and I'm gonna start removing hoses on this side. And that should give me access to the bolts on top for the transmission. I'm almost there. This engine is pretty straightforward. All right, so I just finished removing the intake. I also removed all the coolant lines. I'm gonna go ahead and remove the alternator. So here's the alternator. There's a bracket. I'm gonna go ahead and remove the bracket too. I also want to remove, there's the oil filter housing, and there's like a cooler. I'm gonna go ahead and remove the cooler and the oil filter housing as well, because when I pull out the motor, I don't want it to hit right here on the cord support. So I'm gonna take those off, and the only thing holding the motor right now, it's the motor mount, and there's one last bolt on the starter. So I'm gonna go ahead and take that bolt off, and I'm gonna remove the motor mount. But before I do that, I'm gonna bring the cherry picker and I'm gonna hold the motor. Then I'm gonna remove that last bolt, and I'm gonna go ahead and start pulling the motor out. I'm almost done. Another thing I also want to do is remove the crank pulley, because I don't want it to be hitting on the chassis. I want to have as much room as possible when I pull out the motor. I don't want it to get stuck. So I'm gonna go ahead and remove that as well. But anything other than that, I mean, that should be it. I'm gonna be careful not to make a mess with the coolant. There's coolant everywhere. I did put trays on the bottom. So I have a couple of trays and oil pans so I can catch the coolant. And I also put a cardboard because honestly, I don't like cleaning. I'm too lazy to be cleaning the coolant and the oil on the floor. So I'd rather just put a cardboard and don't deal with it. I'll just grab the cardboard and throw it away, and I don't have to be there cleaning it. So that's why I like to put a cardboard in oil pans and also trays so that they can catch everything that drops. I'm gonna go ahead and remove that alternator. I'm gonna get the motor ready, and I still have to remove the hood. So I'm gonna go ahead and remove the hood as well. Okay, I'm ready to pull out the motor. I already put the chain on the hooks. So I'm gonna remove the last bolt, and I also gotta remove the motor mount. I left the exhaust manifold. I'm gonna remove with the exhaust manifold, and I left a couple of other things that I could remove once I pull out the motor, like the injectors and the thermostat housing. I'm gonna be careful with the transmission. I'm gonna put something underneath so it's not hanging and it doesn't damage anything else. And that should be it. So here it is. I finally pulled it out. I'm gonna get an engine stand. I'm gonna put it on the engine stand. And for another video, I'm gonna take it apart. I'm gonna send it to the machine shop. I'm gonna get it rebuilt because if you buy a new one, it's expensive. I don't want to put a used one. I'm gonna open this one up and make sure everything's good. If everything is good, I'm gonna send it out. I'm gonna get it rebuilt. Once I get it back, I think I'm gonna put a couple of pieces together and I'm gonna drop it back in the car. But for now, I gotta take this apart. I gotta clean the rest of the parts. I have a bunch of stuff that I gotta clean over here. So I'm gonna get everything ready. Here's the motor. I'm gonna take a couple of things off. I gotta remove the fuel rail, the injectors. I also have the manifold. I gotta take that off, and the coils. Then I'm gonna put this on an engine stand so I can completely take it apart. The transmission, I just put a strap. I don't want to just leave it hanging. I don't want to damage anything, so I strapped it down. So I'm gonna hold it with the strap for the meanwhile. I also want to clean the engine bay. I'm just gonna spray some degreaser and kind of clean it the best I can. And I have a bunch of parts that I gotta clean over here. So I'm gonna go ahead and clean all these parts as well. But for now, I want to put these on an engine stand. Here it is. I finally got it on the engine stand. I'm gonna go ahead and start taking it apart. I'm gonna leave that for another video. I don't want to make this one too long, but I'm pretty much gonna take it all apart. I'm gonna see what's good, what I have to replace. I'm gonna rebuild it. One thing I did notice is that this sensor, this is an oil pressure sensor, it was leaking oil. So I'm gonna go ahead and definitely replace this one. The other sensors, I think I'm gonna reuse. I might just change the O-ring on them if they're available. But I mean, for the most part, I'm gonna get fresh gaskets and seals. Once I put it all together, it should be a good motor again. That's gonna be it for this video. Thank you guys for watching. Don't forget to subscribe. If you guys have any questions, feel free to ask. I'll try to answer the best I can. And I'll see you guys next time. Thank you.